Right. What's going on, y'all? Hope everybody's well. Welcome to the Onyx Report's Black Masculinist News for the day. Y'all know what it is. Today, I wanted to do a little short hit about black men as lovers. Y'all know I don't really do relationship stuff, but I had some things that I wanted to get off my head, throw it out there at y'all. So what's up? What's going on, Prince Johnny? Curiosity. Good brother Malika, what's the word? Hope everybody is well. Give people a second to pour in a little bit. I just had to advise my son a little bit. What's up, Mr. O? He's going off for his first interview today, so that was real interesting. I wish I could be a fly on the wall to watch that. M. Reaper, what's going on? So, so I had to get him ready for that. I had to have a few conversations about that. Kind of snuck up on me, Some of it is my fault, though. I wanted him to be able to dress accordingly, but he done outgrown everything I bought him. And because of COVID, we've been in the house so long, I forgot to upgrade his outfit. So we're going to have to see how this interview goes. But he's doing the best he can. I ain't mad at him. Appreciate that support, brother Malika. What's up, Introverted? Lee's Ways, what's going on? Ron, Cameron, what's up? Yeah, man, my son is doing a little job interview today, so we'll see how it go. Yeah, but please make sure, appreciate that, Mr. O. Please make sure you guys like the channel, like the show, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Help us out. Let's get some things going. I'll put some information into the chat. Okay, I'm not going to be too long today. This is just going to be a quick little hit. But just some stuff. What's up, Ian? Some stuff I wanted to get off my chest real quick. What's up, Black Steel? So let's jump into it a little bit. So today, or the other day, I should say, I was reading through an old piece, at least as far as the YouTube streets are concerned. I thought I'd give it a revisit. What's going on, JJ? I appreciate that, Malika. Yeah, we're still working on it. But I was going through some data in a text that I'm go through today because I wanted to kind of refamiliarize myself with it. I've been using some of this text information in my coursework, having discussions in class about black male and female partnering. And, I found some things in it that I hadn't really paid attention to before. And I said, you know what, let me actually dive into this a little bit. Now, before I do, I wanted to qualify it a little bit. The way I was trained, particularly in my field, and I was trained initially in Africana Studies. And I ended up doing my doctorate in cultural studies at Claremont Graduate University. And the program and the field was, in many ways steeped in a kind of post-structuralist, kind of worldview. And to that respect, data was viewed as something malleable, manipulatable, something problematic. And that was just a generic kind of approach to it, right? Now, more specifically, there was a somewhat Africana Studies subset in cultural studies that I particularly affiliated myself with. And even though they kind of shut down this practice after I left because of me, I made sure that everybody on my committee was out of Africana Studies. And they were also black. So it is what it is. That wasn't something they were real thrilled with because cultural studies is not necessarily the same thing or the same field. So if you get what I'm saying. But anyway, part of my training was with people that were distrustful of data. Now, and I got the arguments why. I get it. And just to be clear to all of you, I understand that data can be problematic. One of the things that Dr. Tommy Curry and I talked about on the interviews we've done last year, as a matter of fact, are the ways in which problematic, papers, projects, essays, research projects, and data sets that have come out of that have maligned black men for generations, right? So it's not that data in and of itself is incapable of being critiqued. That's not what I'm saying. We understand that there are problems with that. But here's the thing. if there's a problem with a data set or a particular scholar for that matter, that's something that can be identified, called out, questioned, and examined. And one can pose an argument. But here's the problem I had. And the way I was trained, and in particular, when you talk about, fields where you get this kind of casual, off the hip intersectionality approach, a lot of it is based on anecdotal experience, feelings, moods, stereotypes, assumptions, and there's really nothing there to hold on to. So if you give me a choice between choosing data that may or may not be good and can be revisited, questioned, and re-examined, or just whatever somebody's feeling on a given day, I'm going to go with the data, right? So I said all that to say that when we talk about this particular piece today, I want you to understand it's not that I don't see the problems that data can pose, but really that it offers more useful, more constructive ways to approaching problems than just, and when it comes to Black men, a lot of this stuff devolves into stereotype. That's really what a lot of it does in and of itself. So, I just kind of wanted to qualify a few things with that. Part of what I want to do today is confront some stereotypes, especially as it pertains to Black men in the dating world, right? So this is the text that I decided to revisit. I know many of you are familiar with this, Christian Rudder's Dataclysm. He is one of the co-founders of OkCupid and incorporates a number of different dating sites. Now, to my understanding, at the time this book came out in 2009, he was looking at 55 odd million people on the site. And he also, in certain data sets, actually incorporates other dating sites, Match.com, Date Hookup. I never heard of that one. And some of the other more popular ones. So it actually extends to a wider number than that. And he started looking at behaviors, outlooks, and so on and so forth, right? So I'm going to show you a couple charts and give you a sense of some of the things that we're familiar with. Now, some of what I'm going to go over is as far as the manosphere is concerned, it's well known. This is not new, right? And this is probably the biggest one. I'm going to kind of blow this one up a little bit. Hopefully you can see it, okay? This is by no means new information. As a matter of fact, this isn't even directly out of the book. This is an update to some of the charts in the book. This is a 2014 update from 2009 stats. And I was going to show the older one, but I figured it's just easier to go with this one. There are a number of things in here. I'm going to go through a little bit of this, and then I'm going to let you know what I'm pointing out more than anything else. Now, the most glaring thing about Rudder's book was what it said about Black women. So let's just get that out the way, right? Let's just get that out the way. So at the top of the chart, top section, you see men's rating of women by race, Asian, Black, Latino, and white, right? You see their rating by race. And then on the bottom, you see how women rated men also by race. So you get to see how each race categorized or framed the other groups, right? So here at the top, you have Asian men and their attitudes about each racial group of women. So, they have an affinity for their own women, of course, at 15%. They did not have much of an affinity for Black women at negative 20%. They had a 2% affinity for Latino women, a 3% affinity for white women, right? So that's how this reads. For Black men rating women, Black men had a 2% affinity for Asian women, 1% for Black women. This was actually -1 in the original 09 text. 2% for Latina, -6% for white women, right? And Prince Johnny, that is an excellent question, especially, and this is the real catalyst in this, especially post-pandemic. It would be interesting to know what these current stats would look like, because I think the pandemic is a great game changer in a lot of different ways, from the economy to the stress of isolation, to the threat of, economic disaster. All these things happen, and of course the biological dangers of the virus itself. So it would be really interesting to see what these numbers are. I haven't seen anything that suggests what they are now. If anybody has any information, let me know. But I just wanted to pose a few things on the floor, right? So going on a little further, you got Latino men's perspectives on each racial group, and so on. So you can see in this top chart, right, all of the red even if it's light pink. The strength of the color is based on the intensity of the number, but all the red and the pink are reserved for Black folk, right? The majority of which on the top chart for Black women. And then we go down to women's ratings of men, right? And this is by race, of course, right? So you can see by and large that Asian women had the biggest negative affinity toward Black men, and then toward Latino men. You could see as far as Black men, they had a negative affinity toward Asian women, and for this is women, excuse me, had a negative affinity for Asian men, and then Latino men and white men, so on and so forth. And as you can see here, for each racial group, right, the women had a greater affinity for their respective men than the men had, pretty much across race. And that's understandable because we're kind of the seed spreaders. So, at the end of the day, we're less discriminating. We have more interest in kind of going across, because we don't have to bear the brunt of, caring for what occurs after. So I think there's a wider set of interests. And at the end of the day, men can compartmentalize and sex and so on and so forth. So anyway, all right. So this is the kind of framework that we're looking at, generically speaking, right? And you can kind of see here, with women's attitudes toward each racial group of men, men's attitudes toward each racial group of women, how the breakdown is as far as the 2014 kind of scenario as far as interests. Now, to be clear, in terms of the text, this is the breakdown of the users, right? So there's a difference between the OkCupid users and the American Internet users. So that said, since we're dealing with the Black population, 9% at that time, right? 9% of American Internet users were Black. And in that regard, as far as OkCupid, it was only a population of 7%. So admittedly, the general population for this book were white, urban, fairly young, and what they regarded themselves to be as far as being progressive, right? This is the typical OkCupid user as of 2009, right? So it's majority white, majority progressive, majority young, majority educated, right? And they had access to internet. And you can see the populations of each group is smaller, right? Now, why am I saying that? I'm saying that to say this is not an indication of what all racial groups feel and think across the board. This really has to do with the percentage of those who were using OkCupid. And there are already some class issues in that, in terms of access to internet, in terms of access to, all these kind of things. Now, I think this may have changed even more in terms of accessibility, especially with smartphones and whatnot, but it's enough. It's enough to allow us to kind of peep into something. And you'll see why I'm peeping into it in a moment. Okay. Something else I kind of wanted to go through real quick. Like I said, I'm not going to be here all day. Just going to do this will be a quick hit. This is from another section of the text. And what it deals with here is likability. And so the entire left column, right? This whole left column from OkCupid to Match.com to DateHookup.com. These are all different racial groups of men and how they framed likability in regard to different groups of women, right? Across different sites, OkCupid, Match.com, DateHookup.com, I believe it was. I'd never heard of that one. So I hope I didn't misframe the title, but anyway. So as far as that, as you can see, across the different platforms, aside from a couple of side examples, Black daters on the sites got the most negative, views, most negative perspectives. And in this regard, this one has to do with men's attitudes toward Black women. And what's interesting to note in this is that although, because what the book is known for is highlighting really more than anyone how many people had issues with Black women. And the two groups that were the least sought out were Black women and Asian men. And so when you look at the works of like Issa Rae, you can see them trying to, possibly create a bridge where Asian men and Black women could find some kind of commonality. But what you actually find, especially if you look at Asian men's perspectives on Black women, they actually had the highest negative perspectives on Black women for the most part, except for Latinos on DateHookup.com. For the most part, between OkCupid and Match.com, the most negative perspectives on Black women actually came from Asian men and white men as far as Match.com was concerned, right? Last one I'm going to show just real quick. This is women's perspectives on each racial group of men, right? And you can see the numbers in black suggest a negative likability rating, and the number in red, it suggests a negative likability rating, and in black a positive one, right? So you can see as far as OkCupid, yet again, Asian men rated their women a certain degree, or Asian women, rated their men plus 10%. Black women rated black men 24. You can see the positive ratings. Women, by and large, had a greater affinity for their own group. On Match.com, white women rated white men 90%, right? You can kind of see how that breakdown goes, right? So this is kind of, a rough cut. And I did it this way so you guys, you can screenshot it and look at it more closely at your leisure. Now, why did I go through those charts? Well, there's a lot to be pulled out of that. There's a lot. And you can look at it a million different ways. Like I said, the most popular ways people tended to look at it was in terms of Black women and Asian men. But one of the things that I thought was particularly interesting, and it's not as loud a point as some of the other things, was when it came to Black men at the top part of the chart. Right. One of the things I found consistent across both the 2000s. Appreciate that, Durante. Thank you. I hope I pronounced your name right. What's up, Golden Child? One of the things I found consistent across the 09 text, the 2014 data, and across several different charts was something that I think kind of went overlooked, because obviously the big piece to it all was how Black women were seen. And rightly so. I mean, it is what it is. I don't have a problem with that. But one of the accusations leveled at Black men for generations, right, has been their adoration of white women and whiteness as a whole. That's one of the accusations leveled at Black men. This whole issue, even during the civil rights movement, right, this attitude, one of the critiques brought against Black men, even as activists in the civil rights movement, was that all they wanted was white women. But when you actually look at this data source that's covering about 55 million people, one of the things we find is that Black men actually rated white women the lowest. Now, I don't have an opinion about it. I'm not invested in it in one way, or I don't really have a dog in the fight. I'm just pointing out something that I think refutes some of the common stereotypes about Black men that we've been hearing for generations. That the reason Black men don't want Black women is because they want white women. But across most of the data sets, one of the most consistent things we found is that Black men actually rated white women lower. And in some instances, second lower to Black women. Now, there's still much to be discussed in terms of why Black men have issues with Black women. And so if you remove the white female standard that we constantly hear as a dismissive trope to ignore what Black men actually have to say their issues are, then it raises space for conversation. Because if it really was about whiteness for Black men, wouldn't they score off the chart? When you actually look, see, this is something Rudder says at the beginning of his text. He says, at the end of the day, the truth is in the aggregate. The truth is in the aggregate. What he's saying is, if you really want to understand what people believe or what people, what they do, you don't go to anecdotal situations. You don't ask them in individual interviews. You go with their behavior. And when you can actually look at the behavior of over 50 million people, and it's probably much more now, but I'm saying for this time in 09, if you could look at the behavior tells the truth. And he actually has a beautiful sentence in the first section of the introduction where he says, instead of asking about what white men and Black women feel about each other, he said it'd be interesting to actually look at 100,000 white men and 100,000 Black women and look at what they do behind closed doors. Appreciate that, Timothy. Thank you. What they do behind closed doors, because that shuts down everything. But because I'm a Black masculinist, I approach the data first in terms of what Black men are doing. And of course, as a Black male studies scholar, what are the Black male experiences in question? So like I said, you can take these charts and you can go all over the place with them. And that has been done. This is not new information, right? But what is somewhat new to me is the application of this chart to how Black men are viewed, right? And so part of the argument, again, is that Black men don't want Black women because they want white women. Well, actually, they don't. Not in any large numbers. So now what? Might there be issues that Black men have that should warrant discussion outside of the popular tropes and dismissive tropes at that all Black men want is white women? Or, they just want to chase other groups of women. But one of the things you can see, again, going to the top part of this chart, these are men's attitudes about different groups of women, is that there's not a huge variance between the interests they have in a variety of different women, except when it comes to white women. It's a little lower. Now, there's two ways that I've seen people there's one way I've seen it approached in the manosphere, and there's another way I'd like to offer. One way I've heard it said is that Black men are what do they call it? The garbage men of the dating world. That's a negative way to portray something. It doesn't necessarily have to be viewed as negative. In other words, what it can also show is that Black men are the most egalitarian daters. Yeah. They're the most egalitarian daters in the marketplace. Now, if you want to go with garbage men, you can do that. But the point is, Black men are more apt to deal with a woman based on what she brings to the table. Not a lot of, predisposition, not a lot of prejudice coming into the situation with assumptions. Black men actually kind of deal with what's right in front of them a little more readily. And that actually includes some of the issues I think Black men have with Black women. They're dealing with the issues that Black women bring to the table rather than coming at it with a predisposed idea or hatred toward Black women, especially as it pertains to this assumption that they want white women to a greater degree. The data says otherwise. It's not the case. They don't adore or pedestalize white women most particularly, but really any group of women to any great extent. I mean, look at the variation, right? Really what you're talking about is from 2% to negative 6%. That's it. It's not a lot. I mean, look at everybody else. 15%, 18%, 20%, all these extreme numbers, these extreme perspectives on different groups. Black men are even keel right down the middle, but right toward the end, when you start talking about Caucasian women, slightly different orientation. I found that to be interesting because as much as I've heard about this text over the years, and as much as I've heard about the discussions being held about it, I never heard anybody actually defend Black men with the data against an age-old stereotype that has been used recently to basically reimagine whole periods of African American history. From the Black Power era, the Civil Rights era, I mean, you name it. Even select periods during Reconstruction, these attitudes and perspectives that Black men wanted nothing more, but not only to have white women, but to basically emulate white men. And this is something that Dr. Curry basically blasts out of the water in his book, The Man Not. This whole question of Black men wanting to emulate white men, he blasts it out the water. What I'm doing today is just a slight addendum to that argument that Dr. Curry lays out, by suggesting that based on the recent data that covers the span of quite a few people, the stereotypes about Black men aren't true, especially as it pertains to any kind of adoration of white women. And here's the thing. I don't particularly judge. I don't judge men and their choices. I don't judge people's relationships. I don't, because I'm a grown ass man. I've been through enough pain in life to know that at a certain point, you can find somebody that brings you peace to you. I am not an enemy of men who want to wake up in the morning in peace. I don't care if they're monk. I don't care if they got 10 wives. If it brings you peace, I am all for it. Because Black men of all people have enough stress. And hell, we know from the pandemic year last year, we lost 3 years off our life expectancy. Nobody wants to talk about that. So I'm an advocate for peace as far as what men bring into their everyday lives. So I don't judge. I don't have an opinion one way or another. I used to. When I was younger, I was a hardcore nationalist. To me, it was all one way or the other. But appreciate that, Spook. At the end of the day, whatever brings you peace, man. Because this is the thing. I think when we break from stereotype and we actually look at what black men do, we find that it's not quite what we assume. It's not quite what we assume. Like when I've told this story before, so those who've heard it, bear with me. My wife passed in 2009, and when you're married, you really don't plan on being single again. I don't think anybody really reaches the altar with this idea that they're going to go back into the single world. But it was what it was. She passed. I'm single. I had women hitting on me at the funeral. I wasn't ready for that shit. But one of the things that hit me more than anything was a couple months after, the funeral. I'm really, getting used to single life, at least to the extent that it's just me and my son. I'm not saying I'm out, pulling numbers, but I noticed that amongst my boys, right? Appreciate that, golden child. Amongst my boys, I counted them up and I stopped at 30, right? These are from deep, close friends to associates that I'd known for at least about 20 years, right? All of them had a bachelor's degree. And when I started to look at who they coupled with, I noticed something that I had never paid attention to before, right? And I've said this before, right? So out of 30 of them, there was one that had a Caucasian woman, and the variety of them that were married and just in long-term relationships, that was kind of spread evenly for the most part. Some were married, some were in long-term relationships, but most of them were with somebody. So one was with a Caucasian woman. These are all black males, by the way, college-educated black males with at least a bachelor's. One was with a white woman, Caucasian woman. One was with an African-American woman. Two were monk, right? Two of them were monk. They just basically didn't associate with women. And it wasn't even a hardcore statement. They just stopped. There was no pronouncement. There were no flags. There were no speeches, no marches. They just stopped dealing with women, right? So that's 4. The rest of them had actually sought out women of color from other countries, even if they were first generation in the U.S. And I met these women, over the years, wives and girlfriends. I'd met them. I knew them by name, but I never really processed it. And the majority of them, to be honest with you, were black women from other countries. They weren't just women of color, but I have to include that because there were some Asian, there were some South American, so on and so forth. But for the most part, even from South America, they were, they were for the most part black. And at a certain point, I even got kind of pissed off. I was like, did you guys have a conference y'all didn't tell me about? And, they kind of laughed. But as I began to interview them low key, kind of interview them one-on-one, there was no, I'll put it this way. If there was a red pill, they hadn't heard of it. And at that point, we're talking 2009. I hadn't heard of it. 2009, 2010, or 2009, 2010. I'd never heard of it. They'd never heard of it. There was no movement that they could identify. There was no hashtag for SYSBM that they were aware of. So I'm not saying they didn't exist. I just wasn't familiar with it, and neither were they. These were decisions that black men had made. And when I really began to research it, I found brothers that I'm still tight with to this day that had made decisions back in the 1980s about dating and mating that are very reflective of the manosphere today. And they hadn't talked to anybody. They didn't come to any kind of consensus. These were decisions. This is why I say the manosphere is really just an accumulation of sorts of what black men are already doing and thinking, even before they gave it hashtags and names and theories and ideologies. These are just black men that made that decision. So 26 out of 30 of my close friends and associates had made decisions based on experience. Because understand something, none of them had actually, none of them had dated less than 50 women, black women at that matter, since high school. None of them dated less than 50. They were all fairly outgoing men. I mean, I'm an introvert for the most part, and I'm still outgoing enough to interact with women. So none of them had a problem with that. None of them had a problem finding dates. None of them were horribly disfigured. They were reasonably handsome men. I'm not talking runway, but they were functional men. And they dated frequently. And as I said, none of them dated fewer than 50 black women and came to these decisions. Now, I'm not making a judgment about that. I'm not going to say anything about it. All I'm going to say is, That's what that information came. That was the information that came out of that. And these are real, just informal interviews with boys. I'm like, hey man, I ain't talked to you for a few years. You got a couple minutes? Man, I know it's your wife. She's from Zimbabwe, or your wife's from And I just started these real casual conversations, and that's what came about. And it blew me away because I'd met these people, but I really just didn't pay attention to what came about. So why am I saying all of this? Well, even when you look at that, for all these college-educated Black men, and they run the gamut from dark skin to light skin, from thin to heavy, from tall to short. None of them were trans, so I'm not saying that this was some kind of universal element, but I'm just talking about out of this casual group of men. What I'm seeing in the OkCupid breakdown is what I'm seeing even in my own social networks. And of course, I'm not putting that over OkCupid. 50 million, I'd rather go with those numbers because they're far more likely to be accurate. And if there is a problem with the data set, we can call that out. But see, what I'm ultimately saying is going with the data is going to be a little more reliable than just what somebody's mood is or what their assumptions are about Black men. I'm going to stick with the data. And if it's revealed later there's a problem with the data, then we can critique it and we can find a more reputable source. In the meantime, looking at what we're seeing, I think there's a lot there to be discussed. And I think most of all, what I walk away with is how few people actually understand Black men, because they want to see us through lenses of stereotype, lenses of their pain, right? How they see the world filtered through their pain and then applied to Black men. So from the OkCupid data to my own social networks, when Black men had options, no, they didn't run to white women. They didn't even actually fetishize any group of women. They just ran to women that they said they felt brought them peace. And I don't really judge them for that. But again, at the end of the day, majority of them were with Black women. So for all the nationalists out there that don't want to hear that mess, it's like, well, that's what it was. One white woman out of 30. But again, so I wanted to just kind of throw that at you, give you something to think about. And really, when you're in these discussions, especially for the brothers that like to reach out to me when they're at a family reunion or Christmas dinner or something, and the women in their family start going in on Black men, which seems to be some kind of a ritual at this point. When you are a ConcuSurf raised in a Black family of majority women, you learn how to dodge, you learn how to be quiet. But when you come across certain information and you find your voice and you're able to speak up, I want you to be able to use accurate information. And according to what we're seeing in Christian Rudder's book, Black men are the most egalitarian group out there when it comes to identifying women that they want to interact with. And that's across the class spectrum for the most part, right? Across class. So deal with it along those lines, bring something new to the discussion, and demand that if people are going to debate with you, that they move out of their feelings, out of their stereotypes about Black men, and they engage the data. And really have a conversation about what Black men are doing beyond misandry, anti-Black misandry for that matter. All right. Hope y'all are well. Hoping I didn't skip anything, but like I said, this was going to be a quick hit. So y'all take it easy. Have a good one. Talk to you soon.